who's more African? The African person is the black guy is ethnically African, right? So his people have been in the continent for like thousands of years. Whereas the white guy, his people came to Africa via colonization. So there were settlers that came in and colonized and conquered and killed a lot of people and took over the lands and created a system of segregation or separation known as apartheid, where thousands of black people died as a result of it. Who's the real African? So basically, this is the situation, a scenario that's going on at the moment in the UFC. So you got the current undisputed UFC middleweight champion of the world, Israel Adesanya, who was in Las Vegas watching the fight between Robert Whittaker and Du Plessis. So Du Plessis being the South African guy. And prior to this fight, Du Plessis made a comment in an interview saying that he trains in Africa. He was born in Africa. He lives in Africa. So he's more of an African than Francis Ngannou, Kamaru Usman, and Israel Adesanya. That's what he said. So Adesanya responded to that by questioning Du Plessis and saying, if he would have taken a 21 in me or 23 in me, whatever you call it, right? Du Plessis would have taken it. What would the DNA test say? It would probably say that he's European by descent. Could be British or Dutch, any one of them, but he's European by descent, right? Now, if Adesanya would have taken that 21 or 23 in me, the test would have said that Israel Adesanya is African by descent. So that's what I mean when I say ethnically African. So someone that can trace their ancestry all the way back to thousands of years. So their people had been there from day dot. They didn't come to the continent via colonization or immigration. They were there from like the foundation of the continent. So that's the fundamental difference between Israel Adesanya and Du Plessis, right? So in this particular context, I actually leave you the question, who's the real African? I've explained both situations. One person, his people had been there for thousands of years. The other person, his people came there via colonization a couple of 100 years ago. So obviously, the logical thing is to assume that Adesanya is the real African, right? It makes more sense. And you'd be right if you said Adesanya, and you'd be absolutely wrong if you said Du Plessis. And I'm going to tell you why. For a long time in South Africa, the whites that lived there had wanted nothing to do with African identity. They were ashamed. They didn't want to be labeled as Africans. I remember when I was growing up, it was not in this country, in Britain, it was not cool to be African, honestly. It was like, you could get bullied, you could get hospitalized for being African, honestly. Like, I'm not even lying. So, there was a point where it became cool to be African, right? Do you know what I mean? So I think when it became cool to be African, and the likes of Francis Ngannou and Kamaru Usman and even Adesanya made that possible for it to be cool to be African, now everybody wants to identify as African. So Du Plessis, for example, is one of those people who's now claiming Africanness. But when it wasn't cool to be so African, no one wanted to identify as one. Do you get what I mean? So a lot of whites in South Africa for centuries didn't want to be called African. So they lived there, they benefit from like the economy, they benefit from everything, the resources and everything, but they just didn't want to be called Africans. Do you know what I mean? But now he wants to be labeled as an African because being an African doesn't have as much of a negative connotation as it used to before. Do you get what I mean? We're just kind of stupid, to be honest. So honestly speaking, ladies and gentlemen, if someone was to ask me, it's my personal opinion, right? I do believe that the whites that live in South Africa, their nationality is South African because they were born there, they lived there. However, I don't believe that the whites that live in South Africa are ethnically African people. What tribe do they belong to? Can they trace their ancestry or their lineage back thousands of years ago? I can do it. They can't. If they trace it, it's going to take them to Europe. That's the difference. So yes, in this particular context, the only real African is Israel Adesanya. Now, some of you might not like that fact, but I'm sorry to break it to you, but that's the reality. It might sound controversial, but that's the reality. Israel Adesanya can trace his roots all the way back to thousands of years. Dricus Du Plessis trace his roots. It's going to take him back to some Dutch village or some English village in Yorkshire. Like, do you know what I mean? So that, you know, he can't be ethnically African. Just like I can't say I'm ethnically European. I'm from Britain, but I can't say I'm ethnically European. Do you get what I mean, right? Does it make sense? So ethnically, it's impossible for a white person to be African. Impossible. Now, they could be born there, they could live there, they could walk there, which is fine. And their nationality even could be one of the African countries. But ethnically speaking, ladies and gentlemen, it might be heartbreaking for you lot to know, but I'm sorry, white people can't be Africans. I'm sorry. So Dricus Du Plessis is just European living in Africa, and his nationality is South African. Israel Adesanya is the proper African, born and bred in Africa, and then obviously was raised, well, born in Africa, but was raised in New Zealand. Yes, Kamaru Usman is also a real African. Francis Ngannou from Cameroon is the real African. So it's irrelevant if you're born in Africa and you lived in Africa and you train in Africa. Being African is in your blood. So yes, I'll just rest my case there, and I'm just going to tell you that the real African in this particular context is Israel Adesanya. And it wasn't actually Israel Adesanya that started this drama. It was Dricus Du Plessis that started it. He called Adesanya out. He was the one who started all this drama. So he's not the victim. So you can't be here trying to make him look like the victim by saying, oh, this, that. No, he started the drama. So he's not the victim in this particular case. He started it. He called out Adesanya. Imagine telling a black person that you're not black, or telling an African that you're not African. Obviously, you're going to piss him off. Now, imagine that came from a white person. It hurts 10 times more. Do you get what I mean? So he started it. So he's not a victim. So don't come in the comment section just having a go at me saying I'm just one of those woke people. Because he started it, and I'm going to finish it for him if he wants. But yes, you can look at the history, and you can learn from the history on how the whites came to be in South Africa. And it was through a brutal system of oppression. And I'm pretty sure you've heard of apartheid South Africa. And Du Plessis is a descendant of those Dutch settlers or British settlers that went in and oppressed a lot of Africans living in South Africa. He's not like someone that came in there or had been living there for thousands of years. No. So I just rest my case there, ladies and gentlemen. Being African, it's the blood that makes you African. So that's why if you look at the red, black, and green, the red stands for the blood, which means it's the blood that makes you African. So make sure to smash the like button down below, ladies and gentlemen. Comment as well with your notification. Obviously, is comment, subscribe with your notification bells turned on as well. And I'd really greatly appreciate that. Until next time, peace.